We now turn to the order of the day, and you find that on page 734. Now, this did not go through any group. However, the Church Council did ask a special group to give some consideration to this, and I think maybe I'd like to have Dr. Bruno Schlachtenhaufen report briefly on behalf of that group. Is Dr. Larson here? And Dr. Schlachtenhaufen? And then I'll ask Mr. Nessa to report on the Church Council's action.
You want me to go ahead?
Yes.
Dr. Schatz's convention. First of all, I want to say that this assignment was not one by choice, ad hoc committee of this type. Nevertheless, one works as an obedient servant, and I found it really quite interesting. Members of this committee, which were asked simply to review the document which you all have received, the Ordination of Women, the study prepared by the Lutheran Council. We were to review this and offer a recommendation to the Church Council. On this committee, this committee included Dr. E. Clifford Nelson, Professor of the Department of Religion at St. Olaf College, Mrs. Adolph Strang, a faculty member of Texas Lutheran College, the Pastor Johan Thorson of Grace Lutheran in Eau Claire, Mrs. Erling Wold, a member of the United Lutheran Congregation in Grand Forks, and Dr. Larson was our advisor. Mrs. Roger Jensen was to be our resource person, but because of illness was not able to sit in on the meetings. You have the report of our committee. I might say that we started with a 5-page document after the first meeting and decided that this really was not as clear as we wanted to be. We redid it. We came up with a 2-page, and then finally with the brief statement that you have before you. Do you wish that I go over this very briefly? Call attention to it? If you look at this document, we emphasize these points. One, that our thinking about the ordination of women is culturally and ecclesiastically conditioned. Two, incidentally, I think here we mean to say that culture and changes in culture do influence theology. They always have. They dare, however, never involve a compromise or violation of the gospel. Secondly, that ordination of both men and women is part of the broader topics of ministry, laity, and church, and you'll find that there are several statements in this document on page 53 that speak to this. And then there are certain sociological and psychological factors that there are. These would include such things as the differences between the sexes, that these are not sufficiently greater than the difference within each sex to be significant. The sociological factors include such as the group response. How do we react as a Lutheran group in society to this change? These were considered. There are many personal problems involved for the woman pastor and family responsibility, and we studied this at great length. That there are other hypothetical practical problems in relationship to male colleagues, discrimination and the like. Practical problems too, I can assure you, from a district president's point of view, if this is introduced. Nevertheless, we felt that in all honesty, one could not use these arguments to either for or against the fact or the question feminization of the church, this risk, there is simply not enough empirical information available to establish this one way or the other, and that the church must be sensitive to ecumenical relationships. This would involve, of course, the Roman Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So the conclusion that the case both for and against the ordination of women is biblically and theologically inconclusive, and then comes a reference to a 64 decision by the Church Convention, which I think is rather significant. And then the another whereas, men and women in the pastoral role may be complementary to each other, and since women are prepared and have been certified for call and ordination, therefore be it resolved that the Church Council be requested to recommend to the Convention in San Antonio that women be eligible for call and ordination. There is nothing said here about promotion, but permission. And I would like to simply add, to take a moment, Dr. Schatz has indicated that we ought to also have a little sense of humor in the convention, and that has been introduced again and again. But we received a great deal of mail, both pro and con, and one little poem or a portion of a rather long poem I'd like to share, if I might do that, which was sent to us by one of the ladies. The Christian traditions have warped woman's mind by calling us passive, submissive, sublime. We're supposed to be pure, yet you call us unclean. The things you enjoy most you label obscene. Men are superintendents and preachers. Women at most are Sunday school teachers. Men give the word and women must listen, washing communion cups till they glisten. While men may lay on hands appearing so holy, we cover our heads to show that we're lowly. You refuse us ordination, keeping us for decoration. Young men of God, turn your heads around, search inside until you've found the reasons for the rage we feel, until you grant that it is real, until you know what the church has done to your sisters and brothers, to everyone.
The two women that served on this committee were nominated or appointed, nominated by the board of the American Lutheran Church Women and then appointed by the executive committee of the Church Council. Dr. Larson, none of these men have asked to speak. I have asked them in order that you might have a little more background.
Mr. Chairman, on the top of the report on the ordination of women on page 734, there's a statement from the faculty of Luther Theological Seminary. This document came without unsolicited. I didn't even know about it till I saw it. It had come from the faculty. You will notice they speak there to 4 issues. It isn't necessary for me to repeat them. As a matter of fact, Dr. Schlachtenhaufen has also in his report mentioned some of these factors. This was received by the Church Council and referred to the Lutheran Council in the USA that was making a study of this question of the ordination of women. This is one of the factors that went into the report, and you have it in that little book that was a summary of the big report that came from the Lutheran Council in the USA. Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's necessary for me to go through these, and they have been somewhat referred to already, and therefore this is it.
Thank you. Mr. Nesset, who is chairman of the Church Council, before you begin, Mr. Nesset, may I ask all the group leaders, that is the leaders for the 6 groups, and the executive directors of the groups that are due for hearings this afternoon, will you come right now over here to this area? I'd like to talk with you quietly.
Mr. President,
Nesset.
the Church Council considered this at some length and finally came to a vote, recognizing now that there are 47 members of the Church Council, some of whom were, shall we say, at the head table and did not vote, you'll still realize that some did abstain. But the vote in favor to recommend that women be eligible for call and ordination in the American Lutheran Church was 28-4. If you look ahead on page 736 to the bottom, there will also be a recommendation from our council that the seminaries give special counseling to women who may seek to matriculate at the seminaries. I hope you read into that I'm sure the men are already being given counsel. We think that on the women there is a little bit of a special problem.
May I call your attention to the fact that you have 4 district memorials, or not 4, but under point 4, at the bottom of page 735, you have 2 districts that are memorializing the church that it approved the ordination of women. Then I must report to you the action of congregations. May I ask Dr. Preuss to come to the platform to take the chairmanship for a few moments? This report was prepared in great detail by the Division of Theological Studies of the Lutheran Council USA. The presidents of the 3 churches, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, Lutheran Church in America, and ALC, felt it desirable that we get this in simple language and then publish it and get it out into the hands of the congregations. If church councils have not heard about it, it's because your pastor has been remiss in not calling it to your attention. About 10 congregations have written to me and have indicated that they have made a study of it. Of those that have written, 1 is in favor, 1 is in favor in principle but opposes it on practical grounds, and the other 7 voted no. Mr. Nesset, will you take the chair while I talk to these gentlemen?
Is there any, we've heard the reports from the 3 men and from the congregations. Are there delegates who wish to speak to this? Well, in fact, we don't have a motion on the floor. Will someone move that the recommendation of the Church Council that women be eligible for call and ordination in the American Lutheran Church? It has been moved and seconded. Any speaking to this particular motion, number 4? You're on.
Yeah, okay. Luther Munson, pastor, Strum, Wisconsin. I would only speak to one part of the report as presented by the Lutheran Council, and that is I would challenge very much the conclusions that the Scriptures are so very vague on the matter of ordination of women. I don't know about ordination as such. Our theology of ordination, I recognize, is one of the problems here in the whole discussion, because it seems as though we have a very unclear idea in our own minds of what precisely ordination is. And I know in my own congregation I've had a number who have spoken favorably as far as specialized ministries are concerned and this sort of thing. But it seems that what we're talking about is essentially the matter of authority in the life of the church. And I don't believe that the Scriptures are as vague on that as this report would give us to believe. It seems peculiar to me that in the preparation of this by people who I'm sure would take very great exception to anyone who would try to be biblicist on the question and find proof texts, that they really land on one passage almost entirely to come up with this ambiguous conclusion. And that is the Apostle Paul's statement, "Let all prophesy." There is some case that can be made, of course, for this word in Paul's usage, that prophesy simply means, in his context, speaking for the Lord. It may or may not have anything to do with the pastoral office, the ministry as we most generally know it. Let all prophesy, according to one point of view at least, that I heard and have considered very carefully, is that this word may simply mean, let all speak, let all witness, let all bear testimony to Jesus Christ, his lordship and power. But the overwhelming weight of the Scriptures, Old and New Testament, certainly speak to the necessity of authority in the life of the church, and it resting in men. And here I think that we needn't burden ourselves with all of the proofs if we'd have to come up with them. I think the overwhelming weight of Old and New Testament simply places the responsibility for the spiritual life, for the direction of the church in the hands of men, and I just do not believe that it is as ambiguous as this report would have us believe.
Thank you, Pastor Munson. Microphone number 9.
I'm Al Langhow from Menominee. My congregation did not, and pastor, my congregation did not report in to Dr. Schutz, but it is to the convention. We did study it. We had about 100 people on Sunday morning for 3 Sundays or 4 Sundays. We took a straw vote to begin with, and it was a majority of people before we took that book and studied it that voted for ordination of women. Most of the ones voting against were women. Then we studied the thing, and after we were done studying it, then we voted again, and it was about 75% that did not want ordination of women, simply on 2 bases. The first question was, what is ordination anyway? What do you mean by ministry? Why don't you have a decent consideration of what ministry means? And we're all ministers, we're all priests. Why don't you tell us what is unique about ordination before you ask us to vote on ordination? And on the basis of lack of knowledge, lack of definition, lack of description, and lack of leadership, we in my congregation felt they couldn't vote to change a practice they didn't know anything about. So the consideration of the total understanding of ministry needs a much broader understanding as far as I'm concerned and my congregation is concerned. And then the second question was, yes, we think there may be some scriptural understanding is over against authority. And the argument, since there's no scriptural proof against it, carried no weight as far as most of my people were concerned, because they approached the Scriptures, if there is a chance that we're going to rupture and violate something, we would rather not do that for something as tenuous as seems. So that the approach to the Scriptures, do you do it because it doesn't seem you will hurt the Scriptures, or do you abstain from doing it because it seems you might, was pivotal. They did not want to hurt the Scriptures if it seems that they could. And the second thing was, where are your definitions? I don't see how this convention can vote on anything as poorly defined as ordination and ministry as a whole. There is a study presently going on that would include and be much broader than this, which is in the making. Apparently, if I understand correctly, what we have and are considering is a portion of that report that was brought out early in order that we could get at it quickly. I think it's too quick, personally, and my congregation does too. Thank you.
Microphone 8.
Mr. Chairman, I speak neither for nor against the motion, but for my own edification. In the middle of page 735, immediately before the paragraph which says resolved, the paragraph before that says, whereas women are prepared to serve and have been certified for call and ordination. I understand well that women are prepared to serve, and I thank God for that, but I don't fully understand what it means when it says have been certified for call and ordination. Would you explain that to me, please?
Yes, indeed. There were 3 women at Luther Theological Seminary who had taken the full course, and 2 of them at least an internship. One is married now to a pastor in the Lutheran Church of America, so she no doubt will be a part of that family. 1 or 2 continue to be members of the ALC. They were through or had completed their work a year ago. One of these has, I'm not sure what Miss Barbara Andrews, the girl that's been serving as a recorder for one of the groups, what she did this past year, but I know another one got her master's degree, I believe, at Luther Seminary. And when you speak of certification, I could, and now I'm just speaking in answer to this question, and object if you think I am, but in her internship, a man of the congregation had been superintendent of schools for 20 years. He wrote and said, when we had her assigned as intern, we had great reservations. But he said, I am ready to say, after being a member of this congregation for over 20 years, that we never had a better piece of youth work done. And she preached about once a month. And always, he said, arresting sermons, and they were always anchored in scriptures. Now that's the kind of thing that the seminary took into account when they certified them, because the church council does not authorize ordination of anyone unless they are certified as being ready to exercise the office of the ministry. Microphone 3.
Jean Harris from Rochester Conference, Minnesota. Needless to say, I'm a lay delegate. I speak in favor of women's ordination. I feel that we need ministry in all areas. And we are, as one people under God, we all have responsibilities. And to limit this to just a man's field is limiting our growth in the Christian faith. The question we are faced deals solely with allowing any woman the free choice, simply the free choice of deciding whether she cares to take on the responsibility of dealing with people. And I say that we really dare not defeat this proposal merely because we suspect, and rightly so, there are many doubts about this, that she may encounter difficulties in carrying out this mission. In this respect, I feel that the women are fully aware of their limitations. And this still should remain their free choice to live within these limitations if they so choose. Thank you.
Microphone 5.
I am lay delegate Dr. Copperroot of the Illinois District. Assuming that they are qualified and have received a call, I am firmly convinced that women should be ordained. I am sure that one could find verses in the Bible that would seem to back up either view. Therefore, I don't believe the question can be settled on a biblical basis. I think that the question has to be settled on an historical basis. Who will deny that history is changing and that some of our concepts must of necessity change with it? This has always been true and always will be. If things had not changed from the time God created man, why did God have to send Christ into the world? If things had not changed, it would not have become necessary. Have things changed during our lifetime? God's word was, is, and always will be the truth. The human interpretation of God's word has changed, is changing, and will continue to change. I am asking for a 1970 interpretation of God's Word relative to ordination of women. Over one half of all Lutherans belong to churches in which women are ordained. I am asking that we, as a church body, should say yes to a question, though attempts will be made to make it a biblical issue, is actually historical, and its moment has arrived.
Microphone 7.
Your chairman of your church council already explained that the vote was 28-4, which is just a mere majority over the 47. But I think we have to look as lay people onto some practical sides of this, even though Scripture does not define it. But as the gentleman over there stated, just because it doesn't say yes or no doesn't mean it might imply it. I'm concerned as a lay person in a congregation, and I think all of us lay people should be concerned about the practical side of a woman clergywoman. I see the possibilities, and I suppose some will say we should not look into the future, but this is necessary. I see the possibility where a maiden lady will accept a call to a congregation. If she marries a man from the congregation or the community, a professional man or otherwise, will she have to remain in that congregation because of his official position? If she receives a call from another congregation, she will undoubtedly refuse it because her husband does not wish to move. And so the congregation will have to continue with her in spite of anything else. The second point I have in mind is if she is a married lady, and as nature takes its course, she becomes pregnant, and she takes a leave, will her congregation be required morally to continue her salary? And if it does not that, will they have to continue her pension in order to maintain her continuity? And then on the very serious side, Mr. Chairman, last June, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, after approximately 40 years of negotiation and of preparation of theses that you could name from one end of the country to the other, have finally adopted a resolution which permits pulpit and altar fellowship between our bodies. At this historic convention, also, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, for the first time in its history of over 100 and some years, finally agreed to give women the right to vote in the congregation if the congregation so desired. If this church, the American Lutheran Church now, were to vote and approve of women in the clergy, it would set us back with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod to perhaps where we were 40 years ago.
Now, I must inform you of where we are at and the order in which I have seen people come to the microphone. The next would be 4, and then 6, and then 8, and then 9, then 5, then 4, then 3, then 1, then 2, then 9. This is the way they are in the order in which I have seen them at the microphones. Next in order is microphone 4. Are you moving the question? All right, that would conclude the debate. The motion is that we proceed to vote. Is that my... All in favor of that indicate by saying, wait a minute, you're raising a point of order? 7?
May we call for a written ballot on this?
On point of order, it's not necessary. If you object, but normally a point of order, or I mean calling for the question, doesn't have to, but if you wish it, what is your desire? May we then have a motion that we proceed to vote now? You can call for a written ballot on the issue. Is that what you meant? That would be in order, but let's first get the item that's before us out of the way. All those in favor of voting now indicate by saying aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The motion is carried, and we proceed to vote. Now your motion is in order, sir, at microphone 7.
I would like to move the convention to have a written ballot on this measure.
You have heard the motion. Is there a second to that? In fact, all we need is to have the request, and then it's in order to grant it. So we shall rule that the voting be... Yes.
Is it possible at this time to move a substitute resolution?
No, because they have called for the question, and so it would not be in order. And we now let me to be very clear that you know what you are voting for, to recommend that women be eligible for call and ordination in the American Lutheran Church. So it's yes or no. And again, I will ask that you use ballot number 2 if you have it. If you don't have it, then use such paper as you do have, but do not fold the ballot.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Number 9. Yes. It's on, I guess.
Dr. Moore.
I'm just wondering, we're stopping debate on what I think is a pretty important question. And would this be the same effect as calling for the previous question? If so, it takes a 2/3 majority, I believe.
We had, in the judgment of the chair, far more than that.
Okay.
If you want to question it and we take another vote.
I have no vote. I'm simply asking.
Beg pardon? All right, that's always in order. Before you vote now, it has been requested that we have a standing vote. Let me be sure that the Committee on Elections are at their posts. Yes? This is the chairman of our Committee on Elections.
Mr. Chairman, we have been assigned in this case certain tables to count rather than districts, as was indicated in our last vote. If the Elections Committee would follow the original instruction, it would be simpler for us.
You mean on this now rising vote?
On this rising
All right. You are the chairman, and will the members of the Elections Committee take the posts that you have agreed to take? Now the motion, there's been a call for another vote. They questioned the judgment of the chair, and this is perfectly proper to do that. And that instead of voting by voice, that we vote by standing. And the motion is this, that we proceed to ballot, that is calling for the question. If you are in favor of proceeding to ballot, then you will vote on, I'll call for that first. If you are against, then you'll stand the second time. Are you clear now? All those who are in favor of our proceeding to vote now, will you please stand? Is Mr. Nessett here? If so, will you please come here a moment? remain standing until we're sure that we've gotten the... All right. The chairman, Pastor Herder, has asked that the members of the election committee come here and report to him.
It's going to be close. Be close.
I am told that there appear to be committee members that are waiting to count the next vote. Will you please count or bring in the report on the vote we just took? Or are there any members of the election committee who didn't get your vote? I mean, didn't get to count the vote.
Number 7.
Chairman, was there a call for the opposition?
No, because we haven't yet gotten the vote on the first vote, and we'll call for the opposition the moment that that's in. The chairman of the elections committee finds that there are some of those who were supposed to be tellers who evidently have not reported. And whether it's on one side of the question or another, we got to be sure we've counted all the votes. Microphone 3.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
What will this do in case this Alf Larson, Southeast Minnesota District, what would this do in case it was voted down with equal employment for women, men and women, which is national law?
This is not under discussion now, and therefore that's hardly a point of order.
Okay.
If they vote to continue discussion, then we can admit that.
Mr. Chairman, while we're waiting, may I make an announcement?
Yes, indeed. Will you make your announcements while we're waiting?
At the rally tonight, when we will be in the arena, which is the round building in that direction, there will be some portions in the center of the arena that will be reserved for local pastors and their wives, for the church council and their wives, and for local church council members, so I hope you will honor those reserved areas. There are plenty of seats, and there will be, we hope to fill the arena, but you have to help us do that. And then this noon, the Conference on Inner-City Ministries will be having an open meeting in the River Room Annex, and should you wish to get sandwich and join them, they'd welcome any of you in the River Room Annex at noon.
While they are clarifying the count, let me make several important announcements. You may have wondered why we had this huddle up in front. One of the delegates proposed that we cancel the group meetings this afternoon and instead have the boards report directly in order to gain those 2 hours of time. But he didn't want to introduce it on the floor and get the confusion of discussion here. If the chairman of the groups or the executive directors objected, they were agreed that this might be a fine procedure in order to gain some time, and therefore I am going to, when we get the floor cleared of the issue that's before us, propose that you support canceling the group hearings this afternoon and that we reconvene in plenary at 1:30 p.m. We're not voting on it now because it's before us.
788 yes votes.
I let the chairman of the committee report.
Yes vote 788.
This tells us, without taking the other vote, that it's carried by more than 2/3 majority. Therefore, we proceed to vote. Now, you did have a ballot, or you were in the process of doing so, and let's again, to be sure that you know what we're voting on, to recommend that women be eligible for a call and ordination in the American Lutheran Church. If you favor that, vote yes. If you are opposed, vote no. And we'll ask that they be collected instead of passed to the right, so that we are assured that no one can challenge the fact that somebody slipped a couple of votes in. I say that, yes, Chairman of the Committee on Elections, Pastor Herder.
Confusion. I believe that some of our elections committee were out. We are following the original pattern suggested by our secretary. This is strictly for the elections committee to pick up from the tables that were assigned to them.
All right, this is an announcement for the election committee, not for the rest of us. Microphone 3.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. When we just concluded this vote on the issue of whether we were ready to vote, did that include the idea of the method that we would use? That we would now vote by ballot?
Yes.
Oh, it included that.
No, the vote by ballot was called for, and I was about to put it to a vote, but when anyone calls for this privilege, this usually is automatic in order to safeguard the on sensitive issues that everyone may vote without being checked on or having anybody look over his shoulders. Microphone 9.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a bit confused. Did we have the negative vote? The negative vote?
The chairman ruled that since there was more than a 2/3 majority yes, it wasn't necessary to have the negative vote, for it carried.
What was that count, please, sir?
798, was that it, Pastor Herder? 788. That was the report of the Elections Committee. Now, while they are collecting the ballots on this issue, may I ask whether you are agreeable to the suggestion for this afternoon? And let me tell you that if you are, then we'll bypass Parish Ed. We'll go to Board of Publications first, then Theological Ed, then Youth Activity, then Interchurch Relations, then Commission on Research and Social Action, allowing them 30 minutes, then Pensions, Stewardship, Worship and Church Music, Social Service, Public Communications, and then come back to Parish Ed if we get through with that much. It's been moved and seconded that instead of having the group meetings this afternoon, we reconvene at 1:30 for a plenary session. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Contrary, no. It is carried. We have the results of the balloting on the parish education to the ordination of women. Pastor Herder?
A total number of 975 votes cast altogether, 1 marked abstaining. In favor of the ordination of women with the yes vote, 560, no, 414.
The chair declares the action on this issue carried. For the sake of the delegates, let's be sure what that means. This does not mean that ordination happens automatically. If a woman is called for a chaplaincy, we'll say at a hospital, or called as an assistant pastor or as a pastor of a congregation, and accepts it, then authorization, or the authorization is there for ordination. But apart from receiving a call and accepting it, the ordination does not occur. I think that while I did announce we'd go then to the Board of Publications this afternoon, are you willing to wait for a few moments? And let's turn to page 734, microphone 7.
Oh.
Yes.
In order to avoid any misunderstanding, I would suggest that the statement you just made would be officially published, so there is no misunderstanding.
This is just really a matter of the handbook or the bylaws, but you feel that it ought to be made a part of the minutes, or that I ought to report this to the church? I might say, Mr. Steinmeier, that I have promised the commentator to send them a statement that I'll have to write while I'm riding home, and I could include something that'll be in the commentator.
Well, knowing the prestige you hold, I think a special statement in some publication to the effect of what you have just said would carry a lot of weight and perhaps would calm some fears that we may have.
I will see to it that it is recorded either in the commentator or in the Lutheran Standard. Was there someone at microphone 8? Will you turn to page 734? There was a second resolution to recommend that the seminaries give special counseling to women who may seek to matriculate at the seminaries. Now, that'll have to be referred, I would think, for the Board of Theological Education for implementation. Are you ready to vote on that? Yes. Microphone 2.
Mr. Chairman, I would speak against this particular resolution. I think it's an insult to the women, and I think it's an insult to our seminaries. I would assume that they are counseling, giving, as it were, special counseling to all students matriculating at the seminary, and I don't really see that it's necessary to pass this and say special counseling. If we want to say something about the counseling that they are doing before the students enter or while they are there, I think that would be one thing, but I don't think this is the place for it, and I would urge the rejection of this.
We can either vote it down, or someone might offer a motion to table. Microphone 9.
I was just going to agree with him. If there are no scriptural problems and if there are no other kinds of problems, it's an absolute insult to women to say they need special counseling, and I think this thing just plain ought to be voted down.
Would you prefer that or to table? You can vote it down, but...
I'd much rather see it voted down and let the women know we think that they're as good as we are.
All right, are you ready to vote? If you want to vote to establish it, then yes. If you want to vote it down, no. Those in favor of this action or this proposal indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. No. It's the judgment of the chair that the vote or that the motion lost. If you want to challenge that, we'll have to have a standing vote. You accepted? All right, the motion lost.